NZZ Online präsentiert. Die Sondersendung zum Tag. Impulse Spezial.
Herzlich willkommen zur ersten Spezialsendung direkt vom World Economic Forum in Davos. Seit Chesley Sully Sullenberger vor 2 Jahren den US Airways Flug 1549 im Gleitflug sicher im Hudson-River notgelandet hat, ist er ein Held. Wie lebt es sich so als Held? Und was kann man von ihm lernen, wenn es darum geht, Entscheidungen unter Hochdruck zu fällen?
Captain Sullenberger, 2 years ago you saved the lives of 155 people and became a hero in an instant. A year ago you retired as a pilot. How do we have to imagine as the life of a retired hero?
Well, it's really not a retirement. I just took one job off my plate. I'm doing lots of speaking, I'm writing a second book, and doing some safety work and advocacy in the government of the United States.
What will your second book be about?
It will be a leadership book, an examination of leadership, not only through my experience, but the experience of others.
Okay. Let's go a little bit back. 2 years ago, your life changed in an instant. Were you personally prepared for the public attention and everything that followed?
I think I was prepared probably better than average. I mean, there really is no preparation for such a sudden bit of notoriety. I mean, words almost cannot describe it. You'd have to go through it yourself to fully appreciate the enormity of it, how overwhelming it could be. I mean, we were getting 250 media requests per day initially. The satellite trucks were parked in front of our house for a week and a half. I had never done any public speaking before in my life, and now it's my main job. So I had to very quickly learn a new way of living this new life and become better at some skills I had and develop new skills.
But how did you deal with the sudden fame? Was it easy?
No, it was hard. I mean, it was really overwhelming. The intensity of it, the constancy of it, the amount of it. And everywhere we went, people would recognize us, and which was really good in a way, but it required, different skills. When I'd spent the vast majority of my life being completely anonymous, this was just a sudden and complete change. It was very different.
Now 2 years later, it's a little bit calmer?
Yes, the pace is slow, it's more manageable. And I think also just through practice, we've gotten better at living this new life.
So can you share with us some insights on the factors that can make the difference in such a critical moment of crisis as you lived? What are the key factors?
Well, I think every pilot learns what we call a professional calm, which isn't really so much a calm as having the discipline to be able to compartmentalize one's mind and clearly focus on the task at hand in spite of the stress. So I think there were 3 things that I did particularly well that day. One was I forced calm on myself. The second was I imposed order on a situation that might have been chaotic. In other words, I was able to take a lifetime of training and of experience and figure out a way to solve a problem I hadn't seen before. And finally, because of the extreme workload and extreme time pressure, I knew I didn't have time to take all the actions I would like. So I had to prioritize and do only the most important things, but do them very well.
And the process, how you made this decision, was it more intuitive or more a rational process?
Well, hopefully it was some of both, but it happened very suddenly, very quickly, and it was immediately obvious to me that this was going to be an absolute challenge of a lifetime, unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. But I looked out the window. I knew what my options were. There were only 2 runways anywhere near us, and I decided in what I describe as a visual, conceptual way, not necessarily doing the math, but judging our altitude, our speed, our descent rate, our heading away from the airport, how far we had to go to turn back to it. I just decided I couldn't make either runway. So the only option left was the river. And it was the only place in the entire metropolitan area where there's constant development of high-rise buildings. The only place to go was the river.
People described you as cool and calm during this crisis. Were you really calm inside? Could you force yourself to stay calm?
Well, I had to force myself to do it. You're right. I mean, with such a sudden life-threatening event, my body reacted normally in a very human way. I could feel, even as it was happening, my blood pressure, my pulse shoot up. I could feel my visual perceptual field narrow because of the stress. But I had the experience to be able to do my job in spite of it, but it required some effort.
Do you think, you said this can be learned as a pilot, you have a lot of training, but is it also a little bit a question of character? Have you stronger nerves than other people?
I don't think I have strong nerves. I think maybe my temperament is such that I'm not easily disturbed. I have kind of a calm temperament to begin with, but this is something that can be learned, obviously, yeah.
So we talked about the training and the experience. How high was the portion of luck this day?
Well, circumstances absolutely were with us. I mean, it was daylight. The snow had stopped earlier in the day. The visibility had greatly improved. Had it been dark or had the visibility been less, it would have been much harder. And the fact that we were in an area of the river where there were so many ferries that traveled between New Jersey and New York, and so rescue forces were immediately available to us. In fact, the New York waterway ferries arrived within 4 minutes of our landing.
Mm-hmm. So, if we want to learn something, let's say, people in everyday life, they don't have like such strong nerves. What would your advice be to those people if they have to make a decision under a lot of pressure?
I think that everybody has the ability to do something extraordinary when they're faced with an extraordinary challenge. I think that it's just human nature to be able to reach out and help others and do what we can in the time of need.
And you think that one can train its own nervous system to function better under pressure?
Yes, I think practice helps and exposure to it helps. I think there are several elements. If we know we're going to experience a stressful event, the more we can prepare for it and practice what we can for it helps. And then the more time, the more often, the more exposure we have to similar situations, the less stressful they are to us.
But still, this was the worst case, and you.
Yes.
Well, as a pilot, you experience the worst case in simulators. But people in normal life, if the worst case arrives, they're more unprepared, I suppose.
And in a flight simulator, you can certainly practice some of the maneuvers, but without the life-threatening jeopardy, your physical reaction just cannot be the same. It's very hard to replicate that kind of stress.
The same thing that happens to people when they have to make a decision under pressure is they have a complete blockade. Have you an advice how to break this blockade?
Again, I would say preparation. Having clear priorities. I spent 42 years of flying before the Hudson-River landing 2 years ago. I'd been an airline pilot for 29 years, and I'd paid attention along the way. Instead of just repeating the same hour of flight 20,000 times, I tried to make each hour of flight, each flight better than the last one. I tried to always learn from it and improve my skills and understanding. So I think having paid attention for a long time gave me the ability to solve a problem I'd never seen before by drawing upon my experience and what I did know and applying it in a new and different way.
The global world is getting more and more complex. The pressure on decision makers is rising, and the average time to make a decision is diminishing. Are there any lessons you can give business and political leaders for making better decisions?
I think a full appreciation of the risks. I think we have to go out and look for risks and proactively find them and engage them and fix them, or find a way to mitigate them. If we wait and simply react, then we're already behind.
But the preparation for a worst case is very costly. There's a lot of experience, of training, education for people, leaders, etc. And this makes safety a huge cost factor. So do companies in all areas have a tendency to become a little bit careless?
I think there's always the tendency to think that the cost of safety is too high. But I believe that's a false dichotomy. And I think it's a function of the fact that we take too short-term a focus. In the short term, things can be very expensive. But if we take the longer view, I think safety can pay for itself. For example, now, in terms of airline safety, Nothing is more expensive than a major accident. And if we take action every day in a proactive way, looking toward the long term to decrease risk and increase training, if we can prevent one accident, safety will more than pay for itself.
The crisis showed that a lot of leaders were really focused on the short term. So what can we do to open the view to have the long-term risks considered?
Well, we have to make people accountable for their choices. We have to realize that safety cannot be defined simply as the absence of a lot of recent accidents or incidents. Unless we do the hard work and we identify risks, we never know how many near misses we may have had. We never know how many times every link in that causal chain of events is in place except one or two. Whether you're exploring for gas and oil in the Gulf of Mexico or flying an airplane, the same principles apply. We have to have an accurate appreciation of risk.
Well, one last question. I suppose in the last 2 years you mentioned you had a lot of interviews. What was the most bizarre or funny question you were asked so far?
Oh gosh, there have been a lot of good questions, not too many that are bizarre. I get asked a lot if my glider training helped me, and it really didn't. I mean, that was so long ago, and the gliders are such small, slow airplanes that the flying characteristics are very different than a large jet. I think what helped me more was paying attention on lots of flights and managing the height and speed of the airplane accurately, so I knew how far we could glide.
Mr. Sullenberger, thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you, it's good to be with you.
Das war Impulse Spezial. Den Spezialreport für Anleger. Präsentiert von NZZ Online.